welcome to episode 7 of King Arthur and Lady of the Lake. Today we are discussing the nice guy, the bad boy and the nice girl. The bad boy and the nice girl. So I'm really interested in this. I've had a couple of guys contact me over the time since I've been working with men saying, what about the nice guy? He always finishes last. A woman always wants the bad boy. What do you think about the bad boy, Michael?
So I can honestly say I've never actually been a bad boy or a nice guy. I think I've found a reasonable midway point, I think. But there have been times of life where I have, swayed over one side being a nice guy or the other side being a bad boy, and you get different things from either side of that, right? So, and I have seen this. I've had a couple of clients just recently that said, I've been the nice guy for so long. It's like I'm compassionate and loving and caring and all this sort of stuff. And she ends up cheating on me, or she doesn't find me interesting or attractive or desirable anymore. And I'm like, then I go, okay, well, fuck you. I'm going to be a bad boy. I'm not give a shit. And then I get out there and all of a sudden I'm attractive and the women want me and all this sort of stuff. But those relationships never last that long as well. So these guys have said, I don't know what to do. Like, am I meant to be a bad boy or a nice guy? Because the nice guys get trodden on and the bad guys don't hang around for long. And it's like, where's the good middle ground? I think I've found it. But that's my opinion, because I think there's a stereotypical bad guy. What would you say the stereotypical bad guy is, Helen? And then we'll talk about the nice guy.
Interesting. This is what's really interesting to me, kind of like, what is this narrative around the bad boy and the nice girl? Like, what are we even thinking when we think of that? Because I hear that nice guys finish last, etc. And you also hear that thing in both men and women, or it's not somebody that you'd take home to your mum, or she's not somebody you'd take home to your mum, as in there's a naughtiness about them, or there's something about them that's risque. And
but it can be fun for a short period of time. We're not going to take him home or her home, but let's have some fun for a little while.
I think there's also a bit of a deeper kind of shadow psychology to it, that the person who behaves really quite aloof and is really hard to pin down as such. We've talked about this before in other mediums, Michael, where we've talked about the level of deep insecurity that we carry. Just, globally, there's this deep level of needing approval. And I think, for me, the psyche is that the person wants the approval from the person who's not going to give it to them. There's this kind of need to be approved of by the person who's running, or by somebody who doesn't care. It's kind of, why won't you approve of me? And I know that there's this kind of intrinsic thinking in women that I've got this bad guy, but he loves me and I'm going to change him. No.
So what is it about the bad guy then? So what is it about the bad guy, Helen? Because he's usually off the rails. He's usually unstable. There's usually nothing about him that is soft, compassionate, gentle. He can actually hold space for a woman. It's usually just about him. It can be very self-centered and egotistical. And I wonder, what is it, do you think, about that is, because there's a danger to that, isn't there? Like there's a taboo to that. What is it about that that's attractive, knowing full well going into it as a woman that this could be fun for a period of time, but I have no expectations? What is it about that?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I've never really been that attractive to the bad boy thing. I mean, I think it's fun to hang around in a friendship group. And it's kind of almost, watching somebody get up to stuff that's entertaining. But I know that there's a big part of women that is seeking the approval, and that real deep nurturing, that they're going to be able to love them into being kind, or they're going to heal their wounds, or there's that savior from the woman, the rescuer. And so I think the woman rescuer is drawn to kind of the bad boy person, and
Mm,
and that image of the bad boy. But it is sexualized across Hollywood and everything else. Like James Dean was that kind of epitome of the bad boy, and you've had Marlon Brando and all of that, where they were sex symbols, right?
mm.
And so there's a glamour to it, like a Hollywood glamour, but certainly in real life, that's really quite abusive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can, because you and I always go deeper into these topics, like really deep into this stuff. And so we can even explore the shadow parts of the psyche. And you kind of touched on this very briefly earlier. And a common, and it could be a generalization, but a common theme that I have seen running through the girl who is attracted to the bad boy, the nice girl, or maybe not so nice girl that's attracted to a bad boy, is usually the girl who has not had a very good relationship with her father. That in some way her father has been abusive, in some way he's been dismissive, in some way there's been, and you touched on this as well, where she didn't feel approved of. And so this is almost like a real deep, unconscious, rebellious act to be with and be attracted to and spend time with a version of a man who she knows her father would deeply and vehemently disapprove of.
Mm. Because of
What
the
do you think?
projection.
Because of the projection,
Yeah,
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. What do you think of that?
Yeah, and this calls into me as well, the the nice girl persona, where there's a whole load of suppressed rage or suppressed emotion within the nice girl. You grow up and it's like, smile, don't rock the boat, be
Yeah,
nice, be polite. I mean, you can walk down the street as a woman and you're expected to just be smiley. And
yeah,
I've heard this a lot, men like a smiley woman, just smile, be happy, a happy woman, And I watched this amazing show on the ABC, and I think it was called You Can't Ask That or something like that. And it had this beautiful selection of people, men who had transitioned into being women and women who transitioned into being men. And so they had this amazing perspective because they had been both sexes. And this,
that is a discussion that you and I are going to have one day on
oh,
this
yeah.
YouTube channel about that. We are going to go deep into that because you and I have such. I think we probably have different perspectives on that too. Let's
Yeah.
keep going though.
So, so this guy who had been born a woman and now he transitioned fully into being a man. He said,
Yeah,
the thing I love is that I can walk down the street like, and nobody tells me to cheer up or to smile, and I
yeah,
can have a discussion with somebody where I get a bit annoyed with them without being called hysterical, or without anybody going like, "Oh, did you see that? That was uncomfortable," because it's two women being a little bit assertive. It's
yeah,
it's not nice, and there's this overriding thing in our society at the moment of the nice girl, where we've kind of been brought up to be polite and to still serve the man. And I'm talking, like from 50 years ago, the upbringing was still very much that we were in that nuclear family of the wife stayed at home and the husband went to work, and we watched our mothers serve the dads because it was normal. It was that
yeah,
50s housewife thing,
yeah,
and it
yeah.
had started to change, but not a lot. And so there's been a lot of kind of be nice, be polite, and smile and nod, be of service, all that kind of stuff. And so I think there's a part of the nice girl that is kind of released into being with the bad boy, where it's not necessarily their behavior, but they like it. So part of them
Mm.
maybe that's been unrealized.
Do you still think that girls are being taught to serve men, do you? And this
Not
is
so
and
much
this is why
now.
they
Not so
yeah,
much
okay.
now, but I think there is still a subliminal messaging there. We're not all the way through it yet, but it is changing now.
Mm.
I mean, the thing is that I notice when there's an advertisement where they use a man in a traditionally woman's role. I notice it. I
Yeah,
go,
right.
oh, they've
Yep.
used a guy there as a single man raising his children. But the reason I notice it is because it's not normal yet.
Mm.
So I see the changes, and it's so great because my kids won't see it as different. When they're in their 20s and 30s, they won't notice it because
Yeah,
it's
which is
normal.
awesome.
Mm.
Yep. Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
but I think so. There's a subconscious narrative still there, of what we're traversing through, but we're dealing with it. We're not ignoring it. We're moving through it. But
Do you
certainly,
think we're dealing with it well?
um, this is a different topic as well, Michael.
I know it is. I shouldn't have asked that question. It's a different
Um,
topic. You're right. Let's. I'm going to make a note of that.
yeah, let's talk about that. Another one: subliminal
Yeah.
messaging around men and women's roles in the family and in
Yeah.
an
Let's do that.
environment.
So
Yeah.
we'll get back to the nice girl and the bad boy, and there's also the opposite of that as well. There's the bad girl and the nice boy,
Mm.
and and what do you think's happening there?
I always find that really uncomfortable. I see a guy
Oh, that's
being
interesting.
treated deeply disrespectful,
Yep.
and he's kind of just finding her exciting or whatever it is, and he's really in that kind of um, fallen position. Like he's not putting any power of himself forward. He's kind of leaving himself open to just be held however people will take him. There's no kind of this is my place and this is who I am. And it's like there's no knowing to who he is or, as a person. And
Mm.
the kind of the bad girl will never respect him or want to be in a relationship with him. I just see them wiping the floor and emasculating, and I find that deeply uncomfortable. Um, and
So I wonder why that's more uncomfortable. I wonder why that's more uncomfortable than the opposite.
well, I
That's an
don't
interesting thing
I
to
don't
explore.
find the other comfortable either. I have guys saying to me, I am so nice. I'm there for, there's one particular guy from America contacted me and said, there's a woman in my town. I'm in a normal American kind of blue collar town. I
Mm.
really love this woman. I've been there through all of the difficulties. I'm there through all, I kind of nurture her and I adore her. And yet, she ended up going out with the biker in town with the leather jacket and all the tattoos, who
Yeah,
treats me
right.
like shit.
Mm.
And so tell me why that is, you know? And because he's concerned when he saw the Modern Masculine podcast that I run, are you just trying to feminize men? Is this what you're doing? You're coming forward as a woman trying to feminize men.
Isn't
And
it
I was
interesting
like,
people's
absolutely
perspectives?
not,
Yeah. Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm all for men being fully in their power so that they can actually hold the real feminine. And
Mm.
the feminine can fall into that while still being in power and not threatening to the man. So really both people in a relationship, I feel, have to have equal skin in the game. They need to
Yeah,
be both
totally.
in their power and not
Mm.
threatening to the other person, both held in their dreams, both held in whatever it is that they're moving forward in.
Mm.
But when something happens, they can fall into each other
Yep.
without being seen as weak or not coping. Um,
Yeah, totally.
and that the masculine can confide, and that his wife or partner is a safe container for his emotion. That's what I think is really important for a man in a relationship. And a woman needs to be able to not cope, to be able to fall into the arms of the man and just go, I can't do it anymore, or I'm, emotional. He needs to
Mm.
hold her kind of in that watery emotion with strength.
And it's really interesting in the bad boy, nice girl scenario that we started off with. That doesn't happen, does it? That just can't happen because the polarities are so polarized from a perspective of, well, the girl's too nice. She's never actually going to allow him to see vulnerability because she doesn't want to put pressure on him, and he's never going to pick up on any of it because he just doesn't care. And
Mm,
he's so self-absorbed about what he can get from the relationship or the interaction or whatever, that she can never be held, really, can she?
mm. And there's domestic violence in that as well, that
There
kind
really
of
is.
domestic violence
Yeah.
circle. And that kind of, it's not just actually being hit as well. There's your upper class, bad boy as well, where, oh, it's not domestic violence because he would never hit me. but and I call that kind of posh domestic violence. It's like it's not like that dirty beaten look at me, it's exposed. It's the fact that they're really horrible, narcissistic, there's bullying, there's
Oh yeah.
demeaning, and
It's
then
the control, the manipulation.
the
Yeah.
woman says, I've actually had enough. I can't do it anymore. I think I'm going to leave, or I'm going to stand in my power for a minute. And then they bring the flowers and go, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I know I've been going through a hard time, and there's excuses, excuses, excuses. And then the female, who's so glad because she's really in love with him, goes, oh, thank you. I know you're sorry. And then she says to all her friends, oh, you know, I know he was a bit of an asshole, but he's sorry now. And we're really
Mm,
great. And then as she gets more comfortable, the cycle starts again of the kind of meanness leading to more abuse, leading to the
yeah.
demeaning, and then it goes around again.
Which it does, and that really speaks into Stockholm syndrome, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Because that's you know, and a lot of people don't like when I say this, but it is, and for those of you that don't know what Stockholm syndrome it is, it's when the when the person being abused sympathizes with their abuser, and so we see this a lot in people who are held hostage, people who are, you know, basically essentially caged up and like an animal, and held and kept, right, as a slave or as a whatever, but they're basically hostages. And so eventually the person being abused sympathizes with the abuser, and they start to form this connection which is really unhealthy, and that happens in relationships, on not quite the level as literally being locked up, but definitely when you're in that position where one partner is so psychologically abusive that the other person actually feels sorry for them at some point, and they step into this really unhealthy codependent relationship where one person is being abused, but they feel like they're not worthy of anything else, and
yes,
the abuser wants control and manipulation over the situation as well. And
yeah.
so, yeah,
And
you were
that
going to say
is
something to
the
that?
that's that's the typical kind of bad boy, nice girl, isn't it? You know, and then I
It
think
is, yeah,
it is the opposite then, that you see women emaciating men within their relationship, where men
yep,
lose all their confidence and they're kind of a shell of the guy that they were at the beginning of the relationship. So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
really
because
interesting, isn't it? That
yeah, it is
dynamic.
because what's I think we're breaking up a little bit, or maybe I'm just interrupting. Sorry, Helen.
You're passionate, Michael. Come on.
I'm so passionate about this that I go, I just want to talk. When's it my turn? Um, what was I going to say to that? I was gonna I was gonna speak into how yes. So what happens is that because men want to be of service in a relationship, and they start out that way because it's like it's the courting part at the beginning of the relationship, right? And so we want to be of service, and we've got the flowers and all the stuff that we do to try and impress. And of course, when there's no boundaries at the very beginning of a relationship set up around that, it's like I'm courting you, I'm going to be of service, I really want to get to know you, etc., etc. There's then an aspect that can sometimes come in where, and we're talking about the nice guy and the almost the bad girl, if you like. I don't think it always starts out that way, but how I think it starts is that the man is of service, and the woman who may have not had that experience in the past has gone, oh, great, I can take advantage of this now. He's just all over me. He loves me. I can do whatever I want, be whoever I want, treat him however I need to treat him, and he'll just bow at my feet. And there's those relationships that start to get formed, and we start to see the progression over time of the nice guy who isn't so much a nice guy, but more, if we go deeper than that, he's allowed himself to be emasculated. He's allowed himself to slip into this real submissive energy that is not desirable and attractive at all. It really isn't. And the woman has allowed a situation where the man's become submissive and she's become almost this controller, which you might call the abuser in the drama triangle, right? But it can happen the other way as well, where it starts off all really nice, and the guy's a nice guy, and she's a whatever she ends up being at the beginning or is at the beginning. And then it eventually turns into this pattern of narcissism and control and manipulation where she ends up being the person being abused.
Yeah.
So, so I
It's not
think
a gender thing, is it?
it's
It's a
not a gender
personality
thing.
thing.
No,
Mm.
it's not a gender thing. It's an energy thing. It's a mindset thing. It's what we allow. It's how we talked about this before we started recording. you know, we teach people how to treat us, don't we? And so I think this is where, and all the relationships that I've seen in my relationship coaching practice over the years, there's always an element of this. And this is why people end up in front of me as a couple, because there is an element of where one person has lost their power, or both people in some way have lost their personal power, which then translates into the relationship. It's like, where did my sense of self go in all of this? Yeah. And so when the polarity shifts to such a degree where we end up with a nice somebody and a nasty somebody, almost the bad and the good, it becomes a very unhealthy situation that just is not sustainable.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, and I really, yeah, I totally agree. There's the personality of the person moving in, because the thing is that for me, for example, if somebody treated me really well and was lovely to me, I don't think I'd emaciate them. I'd be really happy. So I think, it depends on who you're dealing with. But what do you think, for the guy who's listening to this and go, yeah, I'm really respectful and nice. He's not somebody
Yeah.
who's going to be emaciated. He's not somebody who's losing his power. He actually just wants to meet a nice woman and be a nice partner. But he keeps being turned down because he just comes off as nice. What would you say to him?
I'd say that there's a good amount of shadow work to be done there, because what is stopping him from stepping into self-assuredness, confidence, self-worth, et cetera, that I'll serve you, right? But I also want to be treated a certain way as well. And there's an expectation here. And I think we're lying if we say that we can move into a relationship and however it turns out, it turns out. And that's okay. I think we're all lying if we say that. I think we have expectations and we have needs. And I think if we don't honor that from the very beginning and we're clear in our communication, it's like, I'll be of service to you and I will love you and I'll respect you and I'll be compassionate and I'll hold you, right? But in return, because relationships are an ongoing negotiation, right? And so in return, I would like you to treat me at least as well as I treat you,
Mm, mm,
with the same level of respect, the same level of consideration, the same understanding that I'm a man and I have needs and you're a woman and you have needs, right?
mm,
So let's respect and honor each other in that space and never hold each other ransom from an emotional point of view or a physical perspective, or from a mental one as well. You
mm,
know, I don't ever want to question how you feel about me. I don't ever want to feel like I'm not good enough for you, right? Um, yeah, and in reverse as well. And I think there are a lot of men who are fearful of stepping into that, because we start off and we're getting all the validation and all the approval. And it's like, well, I don't want to lose that because I've been searching for this validation and approval for so long. And now she's giving me that validation and approval. And if I say something, then maybe I'll lose the validation and approval. And I'd rather avoid that loss than move towards a relationship that can be empowering for us both.
So I suppose where I'm thinking
Does
around,
that answer your question?
yeah, it does. And it's interesting, again, I always say that on these. It's interesting because it is, right?
It's
um,
fascinating. As Mr. Spock from Star Trek would say, it's fascinating.
I might have to change my wording to fascinating and interesting.
Well,
Um,
whatever works.
yeah. So really what we're saying is, underneath all of these, nice guy, bad boy, nice girl, bad girl, all that kind
Yep.
of stuff. And it's interesting that we say nice guy, bad boy. We don't say bad man, nice man. We don't say bad woman, good woman.
And we say, and
That's
don't, isn't it
really
interesting? We
interesting
say,
when
we
you
say
go into
bad boy.
child psychology.
Yeah, it is. I just realized bad boy, nice guy,
Yeah,
right? So bad boy is the immature masculine and nice guy is still the immature
yeah.
masculine, isn't it?
We're
Just,
not saying man anywhere, and we're not saying woman anywhere either.
no, we're not. You're right. You're right.
You know,
Yep.
that's really that's really key. I think that when we look at that and recognize that when we're talking about those archetypes, so to speak, that we are looking at the child psychology, that we're
Yeah, we
looking at
are. You're right.
somebody who's not yet matured. And so then within that, we are dealing with the kind of the problems and the issues and the kind of insecurities of youth.
Yep, we are.
Somebody still needing approval or still seeking kind of that
Mm,
assistance to be somebody, to be supported because they're not confident in themselves. So are we saying then really taking responsibility for our own growth in order to go into a relationship as a whole person, that
totally.
we need to really be in our own power to have a really, really great relationship where we
Mm,
can be kind, nice, but still in our power. Um, so what we're really looking at is that when we're seeing a nice guy who's just nice because he's not in his power, it feels off. And there's kind of like a, ooh, it's a little bit, off-putting. And yet when you see a nice girl who's kind of like, yes, and, and it's all kind of like whatever you'd like, there's a tendency to just disrespect it because, again, it's a bit, oof,
mm, mm,
nobody's in
mm.
their power. And yet on the other side of that, it's an immature rebellion and a disrespect, like a childlike kind of, I'm staying out late and I don't care, coming home late for the parents or being drunk when they're not allowed,
Oh,
it's that
I
kind
did
of
that.
energy.
I did that, Helen. I did that. If my dad's watching, I'm sorry. I know I did that.
Didn't we all?
Yep.
So yes,
So
that's
some
different.
I just want to say something because I know that some women might be watching this and they'll be going, well, there's an expectation attached to this. So if he's going to be chivalrous at the beginning of our courtship, and I've heard this around this discussion before, because this is all, it's no different to what we've been talking about in every other episode and what we will talk about in future episodes as well. The underlying thing here is that all of this is deep shadow work, right? That's the underlying thing. And so from that shadow comes the wounded feminine, which will then say, in a woman, which will then say, well, okay, he's going to be chivalrous and court me. He's going to open the door. He's allowed to bring me flowers. He can do this, all this stuff. And then I wonder what the expectation is. Is the expectation then that I have to sleep with him? And it's like, and I can tell you from a man's perspective, we don't, that's not necessarily the expectation. The expectation is that at some point there's going to be a level of commitment shown, right? A level of stepping up the commitment from just dating into something else, from just the odd once a week or twice a week dinner or catch up or whatever into something else. And generally speaking, and this is generally speaking, right? Generally speaking, the transition point between dating and relationship, really, or dating and something a bit more serious, is yes, the physical intimacy part. Because when you get to the physical intimacy part, that's the woman allowing herself to become more vulnerable, at her most vulnerable, where she can be then hurt emotionally, she can then be betrayed. There's all this stuff. There's such an element that comes into this where a woman allows herself to be more vulnerable with that man. And so what that is an energy of commitment. It's not the act so much as the gesture of, here's an extra layer of commitment to show that I appreciate you, I value you, and I want this to go somewhere.
And then the bad guy doesn't ring her back.
Yeah, well, yes, that's exactly right. And this is where discernment for both people come into it as well. So
Yeah.
I think we know when we step into something, whether it's healthy or not so much, whether it has the potential to last or probably not. And if we do the shadow work, then we know where our motivation for getting involved with that person in the first place comes from. Does it come from a deep wounded part of you that seeks validation and approval? And if that's the case, it probably won't last. Or does it come from a real beautiful integrated embodied version of you that actually seeks communion and union and companionship and connection with another human being? And if that's the case, then likely it will last if both of you are on the same page there.
So much to say about that, Michael. My
Isn't
brain is
there?
going.
There always is. We
I,
open up more conversations every time we talk.
I'd love to speak into that in a couple of different ways. I've got two things I want to respond to with that. One, my own personal experience of dating guys who are really nice, but I'm not attracted to. I never ever look at a guy who's being chivalrous as to, well, what do they want from me? I just either, if I'm attracted to them and they're being nice, I'm like, this is amazing. This is so great. And if they're being nice and I'm not attracted to them, I feel bad about it. I actually
Yeah,
have felt
right.
guilty. I've gone, oh
Okay.
God, he's so lovely. I'm just not attracted to him. I wish I was, but I'm just not. And then you kind of go, oh, I'm going to have to let this guy know that it's not happening. And then, you get that kind of the sad man who's like, oh, and that feels terrible. And
Which is the wounded boy.
yeah, which is that real kind of boy psychology, and it really is uncomfortable, and that's
Yep.
been my experience. I've never ever had that kind of tit for tat thing going, but I have felt the discomfort of trying to break up with somebody who is lovely that I'm just not attracted to because they're not in
Yep.
their power.
Mm.
Um, and the other thing that I was going to say about that as well, it's left my mind, but it was really important. Um, yeah, this is it. So what I was thinking as well is we're talking as 40 plus, heading towards 50, right? So when we're going into our teenage years and we're starting the relationship thing, nobody kind of goes, oh yeah, and there's a bag of insecurity that you're dealing with, so I'll let you know you're dealing with that, and there's a bit of
Yep.
insecurity, and there's a bit of kind of female wounding from generations past, and we don't know any of this stuff. We
Yep.
don't know how
Yep.
to be embodied when we're entering these relationships. And so what's really difficult is entering relationships that where when we're in our 20s we believe they're forever, and we inflict the damage on each other that then we hold. Some people never let that go. Their experience of their first relationships then colors their
Mm.
belief of the opposite sex for the rest of their life.
That is so true, Helen. That is so true because, speaking into my own personal experience as well, my first, I won't say my first long-term relationship, but my first committed, let's say committed long-term relationship was my marriage.
Mm.
And we got married very young. So we were 20 and 21, I think, back then. And yeah, we grew into our 20s together and into our early 30s before we separated. And yes, I formed my short term opinion of women and relationships um, based on that,
Yeah.
which was not a healthy perspective, by the way.
Right.
It was not a healthy perspective. And I'm glad that that didn't last long. It lasted about probably a year or two, maybe three, because we were going through a real, very difficult and damaging divorce process and separation process, which a lot of people who follow me know about. Um, but I'm glad it didn't last long because otherwise, still, I would probably have this real damaging perspective and attitude of women and relationships. And I probably would never have gotten myself into another relationship again, let alone getting married and having another child.
Mm.
So, because
But
I've had a
some
lot of
people
people,
do. And they do get married and have another child, but still have the opinion of women that you spoke of.
they do. Yeah, they do. And
So
that's where relationships continue to follow the cycle of destruction and chaos.
yeah.
Yeah.
Where you find these roles that we were discussing before, where the guy is dismissive or, disrespectful to his partner and he won't do housework and he just thinks, oh, that's for you. And then the woman
Yep.
gets buoyed in her opinion that guys don't do anything and, blah, 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 because that's the setup, right?
Yep. It is.
Where then do we, as a society, where do we break that cycle? How do we navigate that?
Well, see, I'm a really strong advocate for the fact that it's very difficult to bring about societal change because societal change requires each individual to take responsibility and do something different and change their beliefs and value the same thing. And people don't value the same things. But what we can do is we can start to take more responsibility as individuals and start to understand that we all have these shadow aspects of the psyche, whether we want to admit to them or not, and that they do play out in our conscious world unconsciously. And so, a really good way of figuring out whether we are moving towards something positive or not, whether we're moving towards change, is have a look over the last 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years of your adult life, depending upon how old you are, and see if you can see a pattern of similar results across many parts of your life. And if you can observe that, then you've got to then start looking within at your unconscious biases, perhaps your unconscious beliefs, your values, etc., and where you can start to do the deeper shadow work around that to start embodying, integrating those aspects into your psyche a little bit better so that you can then create different results. So I'm not sure that on a societal level we can make change. I think it's more about the individuals taking individual responsibility, and we can do that as well by holding each other accountable. So when you're connected with someone, whether you're in a relationship, friendship, business, partnership, whatever the case may be, we can hold each other accountable if we're prepared to do so. And that's where we can start to bring about individual change and then collective change, which is societal change, if we're all doing something reasonably similar.
Mm. Do you know what's amazing about this conversation that I've realized is that our very first episode was about chivalry, and that's played a part in our conversation today. And then we talked
It
about
has.
like the delving into the darkness of the shadow to become responsible for the way that you show up and taking responsibility. And then we've talked about equality and how women's roles and whether it's fair, and actually that it's about the kind of maturity of the environment that we're in as to how we're
Mm.
treated within that gender. And that
Yep,
stood up in this as well, you
it
know.
has.
And then we've also talked about some of the double standards and the body shaming. So
Mm.
for me, I look at as well that it's coming from left field, that why we're in this relationship, the media plays a part on what we believe the bad boy is, the nice girl, what we believe is acceptable and not acceptable, what we see as sexy and what's not
Mm.
sexy.
Mm.
So is the nice guy sexy? Like I said before, the Hollywood guy, he's the bad guy, the bad boy. So
Yep,
that is actually our
totally.
last episode, which is on the view that we have as a society on what's attractive.
Yeah,
So
that's exactly right.
all of this, it's funny how everything that we've kind of talked about has culminated in this episode to how it really impacts how we build relationships.
Yep,
This
yep, exactly.
relationship dynamic around the bad boy, nice girl, bad girl, nice guy, whatever it is,
Mm.
and how we can see all of what we've discussed playing out in the choices that we make with the partners that we seek. And
Isn't it interesting how these discussions, you're right, because these discussions have all started to come sort of full circle, and you can weave, it's almost turning into a bit of a tapestry that we're weaving here, isn't it?
mm,
That's what I can see anyway.
yeah, and you can
Mm.
see how each discussion that we're having, how it actually plays out on the ground,
Correct.
right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
In this
Exactly.
discussion today, it's kind of like, yeah, so we're being influenced by media about what's attractive, and
Mm.
we're also not standing in our power because we've not done our shadow work. And
Yep.
is chivalry dead because of the nice guy
Mm.
thing? And
Mm.
yeah, it's really, really interesting. It's just impacted me now as we're talking, that yeah, this is how it's all playing out.
Yep, totally. Well, obviously we're on the right track, Helen.
And we've got another subject from today, haven't we, that you wrote
We've
down?
got about 3 subjects from today, I think, that
Mm,
I've written down on my little notepad here. So we'll talk about that later, and I think we've pretty much wrapped this up, haven't we?
mm,
Today's discussion. Yeah,
yeah.
cool. Okay.
So the answer
Well,
is really, um, like teach people how to treat you by respecting
yep,
yourself, by stepping into your own power, so you're not threatened or in need of approval by the other person. Is that kind of what
yep.
we came to?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think secondary to that, which probably isn't secondary really, is that the thread that weaves through this beautiful tapestry that we're creating is shadow work. Like it all comes down to shadow work. Do the work, do the inner work that's uncomfortable. Go to those dark places, really understand yourself as an individual so that so that your external experiences, relationships, your life you can start to create these things consciously and with intention. Yeah.
So you actually have to admit to yourself that you can be unkind, that you can say mean things, that maybe you didn't behave well, that that
Yep.
wasn't nice and that wasn't acceptable, and you have to be willing then to change that. Mm,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Helen, another awesome discussion. I love it.
sure was. Thanks,
All right. We'll
Michael.
see you. Thank you, Helen. We'll see you next week. Thank you for listening. If something in here resonated with you, feel free to comment and, of course, subscribe and like and share and all the stuff that you're supposed to do. Thank you very
Awesome.
much for listening.
Thank you. See you, Michael.
Bye.